Hello and welcome to the Being and Becoming podcast. Together we are being honest in conversations about thoughts we're having and books we're reading in the hopes of becoming better, more able versions of our current selves. My name is Logan. Today we pick back up our conversation with me, Austin, Pat, and we're joined by a special guest, Ryan Schwartz, who is a friend of mine from college. In this discussion, we will continue talking about meaning, nihilism, and we also start talking about creating belief structures. One of the main emphases of this discussion will be belonging. But for right now, we're going to start talking about religion, specifically Eastern religion, but then also start talking about Christianity and deconstruction. So I'll turn it over to Ryan now to get this conversation started.
Yeah, I've been drawn to Buddhism and Taoism and the Eastern thought in general, I guess, but those are kind of the two big ones that I got really into because of this idea of non-attachment. This whole, if you hold on to something too hard, or with non-attachment, it's not just holding on, but pushing away is considered a sort of attachment. So if you hold on to something too strongly, or you're pushing something away very strongly, it's going to cause you suffering and heartache in the long run. Again, I feel like it almost goes against human nature not to be attached to something. Like, you want to have that stability. Like, it's something I think everyone wants. But I've found more freedom in myself and more peace, which sounds contradictory. But I found more peace in not being super attached to my own, beliefs and my own thoughts. The amount of criticism that goes inside my head, not of me as a person, but of just, the beliefs, and it's well, is this something I should still hold on to and whatnot? It goes on all the time, and I almost enjoy it now, where it's I feel freer to talk and to hear and to take in, and I don't have to be as critical because I'm not trying to defend something full-heartedly. Does that make sense?
Sounds a bit like Stoicism too, maybe.
Yeah, I've been told I have a Stoic type of ideology too, though I haven't gotten into Stoicism, so I wouldn't know, but maybe.
I've just gotten my toes into it from the podcasts I've listened to and just kind of reading about Epictetus or Marcus Aurelius and some of those guys. It's really fascinating. But yeah, also one of my best friends growing up was Buddhist, so I got to learn a lot about his beliefs. And I remember the first time he told me that he could be a Buddhist Christian. And he said, well, because in Buddhism, it's more of a way of life. It's a set of principles in which you can live your life. It doesn't necessarily claim one God or a God. I think he ended up being an atheist Buddhist, or Buddhist atheist. But yeah, I think that those teachings are definitely very interesting. And the West, especially, I think is very attached to things and status. So it's good to have that tension of, am I holding on to things too hard? Am I caring enough about the things that I value, especially the people I value?
Yeah. So I have a question for you, Ryan. It's so interesting how you mentioned Taoism. It's not Taoism, right? It's Taoism?
Yeah, I believe it's pronounced Taoism, though it can be spelled either with a T or a D.
I mess that up all the time. Yeah, I have really found those both very interesting as well. But if you don't mind me asking specifically, your changing relationship throughout your life with Christianity. So I'm going to assume a couple things and then ask a question. So I'm assuming that you were attached to Christianity and went through some sort of deconstructing phase. Deconstructing Christianity. And so many people who do that, who deconstruct Christianity, they identify as atheists, and their life is kind of defined as anti-Christian. And it's so interesting how you said Buddhism is against attachment, but also pushing things away too much, because that actually creates an attachment. And I feel like you can probably agree with me. You can see anti-Christians or atheists, becoming so unhealthy in that, because all they're trying to do is just push Christianity away. So I would like to know your journey in deconstructing Christianity, but also trying to not be defined by an anti-Christian attitude.
Yeah.
Hopefully that's a fair place to start.
Definitely. Yeah, because it's It's definitely something when I've talked to other people and they find out like, oh, he's not a Christian, like he doesn't believe in God. A lot of people go straight for that, thinking I'm on board with like the I hate religion type of ideology, which
Yeah.
I don't. I am completely fine with religion and like all of them. Usually it's not the religion, it's the people that cause problems anyways. So, but in my journey, it was interesting for me because I went to school for Bible and religion, and most of the deconstruction happened in school. I like to tell people I wasn't a Christian before I knew I wasn't a Christian. Logan, you had mentioned earlier like about my decision, but I don't consider it to be a decision. I don't consider any beliefs to be decisions. You can make decisions to inform your beliefs, but I don't think you can decide to believe or not to believe something. And so in my process, I went to school, was having a lot of these scholarly professors tearing down the stories and literal readings that I grew up with, because in my upbringing, almost the whole Bible was like literal and like a history book. And then I go to school to study the Bible, and it's like, oh, it's a collection of books of different genres. This stuff didn't happen. Archaeology shows that this didn't actually happen. These weren't actually written by this guy, but people would attribute books to certain people and sign it to them. So it's like all these Pauline letters, a lot of them probably aren't even written by Paul. And like having a lot of these academic setting towards the Bible was like opening me up to a lot of different ideas that I didn't know were like allowed to be thought. And that sounds interesting, but like, yeah, I didn't think like, oh, like I'm not supposed to think this way about the Bible. Like my upbringing, like they said, like you could doubt, but like they would give things like look for it yourself, figure out your beliefs for yourself. But if you came up with any beliefs that did not align with them, you would be ridiculed in a sense. That was my upbringing, not in my home, like that wasn't my parents, but high school Bible classes and whatnot. That's what I felt. And going to this other school, and it's like, oh, they're encouraging me to tear it apart, to get really analytical and critical towards it. That's my personality. That's my nature. That's what I love to do. So I, unlike a lot of my classmates, loved when my mind would be blown. Like if they gave me evidence that like the flood, for example, always thought it was global flood, and now there's like localized flood or maybe no flood at all, and they give all this information. And just having ideas that I hadn't even thought to think because I just took for granted what I was taught growing up launched me, I would say, into my own sorts of research and looking into things. Some of my professors were, you gotta have to like hold yourself back. You need to keep yourself grounded, because I was going all over. For my deconstruction, it was like, yeah, through those classes, and then through my own, like listening to podcasts, listening to just different perspectives that I didn't feel like I was allowed to listen to beforehand. And because it was through school, I think that gave me a great appreciation for Christianity itself. Like I had some professors that I still just love. There's one professor I'd go and talk to her in her office all the time, and she would help me with like what she called theological angst, because there were a lot of times where I was just feeling this dissonance in my head between all these things I had believed for years and these new things that are challenging them. And then also going, that's my school life, going and helping at a church in which it's still just like how I was growing up. There was this major dissonance going on. But I gained this great respect because they showed me a form of Christianity that I had never seen before and didn't think was allowed within Christianity. I keep using allowed, but like that's kind of how it was.
Yeah, and it's interesting, like, who are the gatekeepers that make you feel like it's not allowed? Right. You know what I mean? It kind of dismays me to hear you say, too, that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it almost seemed like whoever you were asking questions to was almost belittling you before your experience in maybe seminary or at AU and undergrad. and maybe the church you're growing up with, or just other mentors, where if you would ask a question, they'd give you the answer, but make you kind of feel weird for asking it, kind of thing? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, we can say I did not feel safe to ask any question growing up.
Yeah. And that's not, like you said, that's not an environment you want to live in or to recreate. Yeah, Austin, I'd be curious to get your thoughts, as you were also kind of in the same major in college with Ryan, like same kind of area of study.
Yeah, so I don't know if you've heard about this from the podcast already, but I did go to Moody Bible Institute in Chicago and got a pastoral studies degree. It was technically a church planting degree, which showed me that I don't want to plant churches, at least not in the way that they were telling me how to.
Yep.
Which is just very business oriented, just to say that. But I definitely relate to like the theological angst you mentioned. Like, man, I up late nights. It's definitely like the hardest time in my faith, because it was common to talk about hell and how that factored into your faith and how that factored into a God that could somehow be good. And just, I experienced a lot of turmoil in college, when some of my roommates and floor mates were dealing with these kinds of questions. They're very real questions. But I can kind of confidently say I'm not haunted by that anymore. I have found some things that have helped me through that angst. Yeah, I'll stop there.
No, it's good. Have some common ground. But part of mine was I almost enjoyed it at the same time. Like, I don't know if you had the same type of feelings, but whenever they would bring up something new that was different than what I had always held and didn't know I could question or like would even think to question, they'd bring that up, I'd get really excited. I loved having the new perspective on things, like different ways that other people were thinking that I had no idea other people were thinking. That drove me, and I loved it, and that's where I got my theological angst, was I went too much. I had something that was very similar to it recently, which would probably be ideological angst now, but like I listened to 5 hours of like lectures on Buddhism and Taoism for like 3 weeks straight at work, and then just was like having such dissonance, and you had the angst feeling was like too much. I just go too much into it. I almost need to balance it more, but I almost enjoy it at the same time. Does that make sense?
So it seems like critical thinking enlivens you.
Yes, very much so.
For my personality, I really enjoy critical thinking, but I need to be at peace. And if there's this kind of critical thinking that busts open my peace, it's not good. That will create an existential crisis. And that is what I experienced, because good friends of mine were like, I just don't think I can hold on to the Bible as tightly as I thought I could because of this. And that was like, oh, I have so much peace about holding close to the Bible. I feel for you because you're my friend, but this is destroying me. And that's where I was coming from with my angst and my crisis.
Gotcha. I guess I should give some context too that will make this make more sense too, because I was considered a good kid in school. I played the part, but I always felt like an outsider within the faith, within school, within the church. I was involved all the time. I was in leadership in a lot of different things. But the whole time I just felt like something was missing. I was just like, I didn't fit in. And so I didn't have as much of an attachment to Christianity, to the point where it being broken up, like the beliefs being broken up, affected me enough that it caused my peace to go away. Yeah, most of the things that caused me not to have peace was that feeling of like not belonging. And it's not anyone's fault for that. It's just I felt a little different within the church I grew up in. It was all based on emotion. If you know any non-denominational church, they tend to go towards the emotional side, the feelings of feeling the presence of God, feeling the Spirit. And I was like, I want to listen to the sermons. I want to hear the Bible studies. I don't have the emotional connection. Like my, what is it, emotional intelligence or whatever is not very high. I tend to have difficulty feeling certain emotions that other people feel too much of. And so I didn't have as much of an emotional attachment to the point where it caused me like disquiet at like what could be considered an attack. A lot of people kind of will see some of those things and feel attacked because it almost is an onslaught on years of putting pieces together, of making sense of the world and of existence. And that's gonna get, like, they're gonna try to change that. That's crazy. But
oh, Ryan, that's great. You hit like a linchpin that I have just been circling around the past several years. And you mentioned the word belonging. And man, that's where I deconstruct so much of what I would call corrupted Christianity. And it's all this stuff that's not centered on belonging. Evangelism that doesn't care about discipleship. That is, I consider that a corrupted Christianity because it's not concerned about a community of belonging. And if I could just offer a little context for myself, you've probably heard it from a podcast, but I've tried to kind of distill down how I would describe my faith. And it would be, I'm a robust critic of corrupted Christianity, but a wholesale follower of Jesus. And my experience with church, I've been trying to find house churches in Chicago. I was living in Chicago for 6 years, trying to find house churches. That went fairly well, and then that busted apart, didn't go well. And even in the house churches, struggling to find a sense of belonging. And especially in churches with pews and buildings is hard. It's been hard for me to find a sense of belonging. But still seeing the value in following Jesus, but also like feeling kind of confused, but trying to be honest in my deconstruction of what I see as unhealthy in Christianity.
I want to ask a question. I'm not sure the best way to word it, but it could be for both of you now that since you both offered something having to do with belonging, and I was going to hone in on that anyway. But what are some traits, I guess, that you didn't see or were lacking or something like that that made you feel you weren't belonging?
sure, I can start here. It felt like it was geared towards one model of Christian in my upbringing. There is one way you're supposed to be a good Christian. Almost to the point where it's like, if you're not raising your hands, you're not feeling the Holy Spirit type of deal. That kind of thing. Is like, I never felt these things that other people seemed like they were feeling. And that's what made me feel like an outsider, is all these people seem to get it, to have what they would say is feeling the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit's in this place. They feel it. And I'm sitting there just being like, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't feel it through this medium. What I would consider the same feeling, I found it through a different medium. It wasn't through like the music or the uplifting things, like I said, the emotionally pointed things. Mine was more the academic study, the learning. And that usually took a back seat. It was more like, this is what you can do to be a better person. It's like, cool. Like, we all need that, yeah, but I've been hearing these same sermons and ideas every year. It's just the music changes and people love the music. But I felt like an outsider because they made this model of Christian be this person that feels a lot.
Well said.
In which I didn't feel. And so I didn't feel like I was what I was supposed to be one of the many other people there, yeah.
I have a feeling that can relate with a lot of people.
I think so too.
I bet that's a solid reason for many other people's, one, leaving, or two, just never believing in the first place. Yeah, that's a great point.
No, I've had conversations like that with friends and family where, yeah, they just don't connect with the music, but then at least you could connect with the sermon, because I think even most people don't sit through a sermon and really pay attention more than one or two bullet points. But I do think I liked hearing your guys', Austin and Ryan's, thoughts on just your schooling and how that The belonging, I think, is such an important component to this. But I think we've really well articulated like the pathos of Christianity. For my own curiosity, to hear your guys' thoughts on like, what do you make of the logos, like the logic, the sermon, the story, the gospel, if you will.
So what's the exact question?
I guess we're circling around a lot of church culture, the emotion, the pathos, like the structure of the church. But I guess I'm curious more on the logic. Is there value in meeting together, having these beliefs? Maybe even we could go into Christianity itself, not just like the capital C church, like the people that meet and profess this belief, but maybe in whichever way you guys want to take it. I'm just curious to get your thoughts on it.
Sure. I've always admired the message within Christianity and within, I would say, certain parts of the Bible. There are some weird parts of the Bible in there.
Definitely are, yeah.
But overall, like, if we're going gospel, I love Jesus. Jesus was a cool dude. I think that I just say I'm not a Christian because we kind of put standards on you have to believe certain things to be considered a Christian. And I don't necessarily believe like Jesus was God in the sense that Christianity says Jesus was God, and that just the idea of who God is, mine differs a lot now, to the point where that's why I said I didn't even know I wasn't a Christian anymore, because I still believed in a type of God. I don't like using God anymore though, but it just differed too much.
Is there a better word maybe?
I don't know.
Collective unconscious?
Yeah, like the universe, being, awareness, something along those lines.
Yeah, I think being's a good one.
Yeah, you would. I mean, kind of in your title of your podcast.
Yeah, we might be a little biased there.
But I just got to the point where my ideas on God and Jesus got too far away from what those standards were to be considered a Christian. But, like, I had nothing against the message. Like, I would still say there's a good message in there.
Yeah.
And most of the time, like I said before, people are the ones that ruin it, not the actual, like...
Yeah.
Like, what you can gain from the Bible, what you can gain from Christianity is great. But the interpretations that people make and just, yeah, human involvement muddies things up. But you can't really get around that one.
Yeah, even people can be very well-intentioned, but still cause, like, going back to what we're saying earlier, and this is very true, especially in economics. There was a story, I can't remember where I heard, where a small town, they had a starfish problem. The starfish would eat all of the food in the area, so the fish wouldn't come by, so they couldn't fish. So all of the fishermen gathered the starfish and cut them up into little pieces, thinking that solved the issue, but they threw them back into the sea, and the starfish population just exploded. So then they ended up having to leave the town and relocate. So... yeah, I just think even though they're well-intended, they're trying to solve a problem for their community, you can end up creating ripple effects that, you know, just, and it's very true in economics too. If you change something very small, it can have a big implication somewhere far down the line that it's difficult to forecast or to plan for. It's interesting too because despite people's good intentions and the malevolence maybe that they could cause or dwell within, I still find myself loving people or being optimistic about the future and about humanity despite all those things. And maybe that's just ingrained in me. I don't know if that's something I could logically iterate or expound upon, but it's maybe more just a disposition with the way that I am. Just there's something about seeing someone at their worst, but still seeing like beauty in them, or still seeing like the potential or just the progress that people can make and like how astounding that can be. Yeah, it's, man, I feel like we're at something like really meaningful to me right now of just like people meaning well, not doing well, but like still believing good things can happen. There's something about that that's just like at the very core of who I am, I think.
There's something central to Christianity, and it's kind of this archetype of transformation and this idea that you can take a crummy thing and make it beautiful, or an unassuming thing and make it the most amazing thing. So I think that there's a certain power in this idea of transformation, and I think that's kind of what Logan has been touching on. Christianity doesn't have they don't own all the rights to the power of transformation. That's what I'm trying to say.
Some reason that reminds me of, this isn't what I was going to say before, but it still reminded me of this Japanese idea of, I don't know how to say it, but it's kinsukuroi something. But it's the idea of becoming more beautiful after you've been broken and restored. All we've said kind of, some reason, just reminded me of that. Also, it reminded me of one other thing. I guess Christians often forget how intense Jesus was about the people who cause others to feel that they don't belong. He didn't say that about this particular situation, but he does say, it'd be better for someone to have a millstone hung around their neck, tossed into the ocean, than to cause one of the little ones to stumble. And that's a very strong and real thing the modern church probably forgets or doesn't look at. So it's just something to keep in mind, I guess, as we go forward.
Are you saying for people in leadership positions, or
just any believer anywhere ever?
Or just you think about Jesus' relationship to the Pharisees and how he's very much against this idea of status within a religion, and he wants the people who are seemingly of low status to be able to have a place of belonging.
Yeah, well said. Very well said.
I think we've talked about this before, but maybe how Christianity was one of the things that was really good at historically, again, but one of the good things I think that was leveling out the value on the human life, of a life is valuable inherently. If the message of the gospel is that Jesus is dying on behalf of everybody, it makes everybody have value. People aren't always going to live up to that call of placing value on human life. There's probably 5 to 10 examples we could think of off the top of our heads right now of just either personally, like when I'm in traffic and I'm not maybe valuing the person's life next to me, or like what have you, but that might have been one of the better contributions to society. Not everyone is needing to suffer as much, hopefully.
Lots of thoughts coming in.
I know we're kind of getting to the end of what we had planned. Any final thoughts, or anything we wanted to go back on? And
if I could just kind of affirm something Ryan said earlier, you were talking about the freedom, I think that's the word you used, the freedom associated with realizing that everything is subjective. And when you're talking about that, like I felt that kind of relief. It feels kind of good to not have to prove something. And I just wanted to affirm, like, I get that feeling, and I see the power of that. Yeah, and I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, thank you.
Love me some freedom.
For people that I've talked to that are more fearful of such things, because, like, where's the boundary? Where does it end? Like, where does it stop? Like, where... Like, if everyone gets to decide their own meaning, that can lead to terrible things, right? Like, and I get that, but it also goes to another point that I like to live by that also started within Christianity, which is this idea of balance, which is just the idea, like, yes, like, you can believe what you want to believe and not have to prove it to anyone, but you still have to balance that out with having community with other people. You can't, like, disagree with everyone or only talk to people that you agree with. like that turns into one of those spirals. That's why I like the different perspectives. But it's this balance where, back to the beginning, it's a balance of, like it doesn't matter necessarily, like you can't know for sure, but you should still try. You should still want to try to figure it out, even if you know you can't find it.
Exactly. Yeah, it doesn't alleviate the responsibility of the search or the journey.
You still need to find a motivation despite knowing you can't find it. And that's me.
This is like very much what Dostoevsky's writing about in Crime and Punishment. Is, I think his name's Rodeon. Is that how it's Russian? I don't know quite how to say it. But it's basically a character that is on autopilot, not making decisions, and then ends up making a very terrible decision because he's indecisive about his meaninglessness in his life. And because of this one terrible decision he makes in chapter 1, he inflicts on himself and indirectly onto other people, like his direct family, great suffering, like psychologically, physically, like he gets sick. In my mind, at least, the way I understood the book was that this unwillingness to, as you're saying, to do the journey, to seek the truth, to be honest with himself and with others, to not play the short game and try to get as much benefit for yourself as you can, even if you don't believe in maybe what you're saying or what you're doing, that ends up costing you in the long run. And I think that could be maybe another, going back to nihilism, because I think that book is almost a direct like critique of that philosophy, is maybe that's what you would want to be cautious with if you are going to say that life is meaningless. Do the work to at least construct something to where you're not going to be filled with so much resentment and bitterness that you're hurting yourself or others, causing more suffering in the world. Then you talking about that just kind of like brought that up in my mind.
Sounds like an absolute, don't it? No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, those are a lot of interesting thoughts. Definitely a lot of things I've thought about. Nothing I completely disagree with.
Well, that's because I limited myself.
Yeah.
maybe we have the uncensored version.
Yeah, we need a part 2 then. We're gonna need a part 2 then.
I think there's something so human about the hero's journey, the hero's archetype, which is facing that abyss, facing the darkness, facing the unknown, and just having confidence that it's worthwhile in itself.
And a lot of people find that through Christianity, and that's why I have no problem with it. So many people find such peace and purpose through it. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't diminish others that aren't a part of Christianity and other religions. They find purpose and meaning through those. Or like me, I don't consider myself part of any religion, but I still have ways where I find purpose and meaning in life. And no matter how anyone finds that, I think it can all be beautiful in its own way.
Right on, Ryan. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
Hey, it's been a very good conversation. Thanks for coming on, Ryan. And maybe we'll have to do another one again.
I'd be down.
Thank you for tuning into this week's Shooting the Breeze conversation. Please let us know if you have any suggestions as to books we should read or topics we should discuss by contacting us at beingbecomingpodcast@gmail.com. And by this point, you definitely know it, so I'm not going to say it again. We hope you join us next week for another conversation.